What's up, everybody? I'm Damon Hatfield here with Brian Altano.
Here.
We're both in the same neighborhood in San Francisco, but coming to you from our homes. Resident Evil 3, the remake, is just about out there in the wild, and it appears to be another great remake from Capcom. Capcom's really just hitting these remakes out of the park. It's got everyone wondering what will be the next Resident Evil remake. Brian, I know you're a huge fan of Resident Evil 4.
Yes. Yeah. So no disrespect to the Code Veronica people. I know that logically and chronologically, that's the next one. That's the next step. But I'm really excited for Resident Evil 4, especially on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I feel like this is the potential that they have to turn this game into something completely modern and bring it to a whole new generation and whole new audiences is there. And it's my favorite Resident Evil game of all time. So yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, some people think it doesn't need to be remade because it's already pretty close to perfect.
And yeah, and you know what? They're not wrong. Resident Evil 4 is one of those games that I replay probably once or twice a year. I've bought it on every single console it's ever released on. I bought it on iPhone when they put it there a couple years ago. Wow. I have it on Switch. It's a phenomenal game. I completely agree. It doesn't need to be remade. But if they were to remake it, I would be all for it. And it got me thinking. All for it.
Good. Love it.
If they remade it, it got me thinking, what could they actually do to change this game around? Now, if you look at Resident Evil 2 and 3, they're running on this new engine that Capcom's been working on, which is stellar. The same engine that Resident Evil 7 is running on. Right. And so it's fully capable of doing whatever they throw at it, conceivably. Resident Evil 4 is a 15-year-old game now. And so it's, yeah. And so, you know, when Resident Evil 4 launched, it felt a generation ahead. It didn't feel like it was sort of the swan song for the GameCube. One of the final great games to release for that era. Also came to PS2 as well. And I think it holds up really well, but you know, it could use a few sort of tweaks to modernize it. I think that remaking it completely in Capcom's new engine, not just doing HD textures and stuff like that, but completely redoing every asset in the game would be really cool. Now, what's different about this game is that it's about 15 to 20 hours long for most new players. Even skilled pros like me who play that game a lot, you know, it takes me about 10 or 15 hours to beat that game. So this is a big meaty game. This is different than Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 3, which you can beat, you know, in 5 or 6 hours. Yeah. And so I think what you could add to this game right off the bat is you would have to make it so Leon could run and shoot at the same time. That's the biggest thing. It's so different than 2 and 3 because 2 and 3 have locked camera angles, and so remaking them as sort of like, you know, guns out third-person adventure action games, it makes sense. Resident Evil 4 is already mostly there, but I think a lot of like new players and modern gamers, when they sit down to play Resident Evil 4 for the first time, get pretty turned off by the kind of stop and pop or whatever we called it for a while.
I like it.
Yeah, and so I think you would have to make that game so you could run and shoot at the same time, which I think a lot of people would think would make it too easy. And so the way to circumvent that is add more enemies, put enemies everywhere, tons and tons of enemies.
Yeah, you're right. It is a much meatier game than 2 and 3, I think, and it also introduced the Mercenaries mode, which I thought was really fun, and I'd like to see an updated version of that.
Yeah, that was actually like one of my favorite kind of bonus modes in a video game ever. I put like hundreds of hours into Mercenaries, just unlocking all the characters and costumes and stuff like that. So I'd love to see that. Speaking of, this would be a really good opportunity to sort of dig in and add a ton of new costumes and weapons and stuff like that. The Resident Evil remakes for 2 and 3 have done a really good job of that, and Resident Evil 4 already had a bunch of ridiculous costumes. Like if you beat the game on certain difficulties, you unlock basically like a pop star or like a full-on knight suit of armor for Ashley. Leon can play as a cop or like a full like 1920s gangster. There's a bunch of very ridiculous costumes in this game. There's also the side missions of Ada Wong, her whole story. So that's in there too.
Well, I was gonna say, wasn't there some stuff that was cut that was actually planned for the game?
Yeah, so like longtime Resident Evil 4 fans might not know this or may know this, but there was one of the first debuts that we ever saw of Resident Evil 4 had a bunch of really weird content of Leon basically exploring like a spooky house, almost like the first Resident Evil game. And there were like straight up poltergeists, and one of them was this dude who had like a hook. And so this like kind of almost ghost would appear with a hook to try to kill you. That never made it into the final version of the game. So obviously there's a bunch of cut content there that didn't make it into the final vision for Resident Evil 4, but doing sort of like an HD remastered director's cut version of RE4 and putting it out for next gen consoles could be a really cool opportunity to kind of revisit that stuff and bring all of that stuff back in.
Yeah, for sure. Now there is an RE4 HD project out there, right?
Yeah, so a group of like incredibly dedicated fans have been painstakingly recreating every single texture in the original Resident Evil 4 in HD. This was sort of like undercut a little bit by Capcom's own efforts a few years ago to port Resident Evil 4 to literally every platform ever made. And so in the PS3 era, they made Resident Evil 4 HD, which was about as HD as we were allowed to get on the PS3 and such. And so that's been that game's been ported now to PC, to Switch, to a bunch of other things. There's also like the Wii version that had pointer controls. This game's been around, but the RE4 HD project, which you can check out by going to re4hd.com, is a basically an entire texture overhaul of the game where every single texture is being updated with something more modern. These guys are going into like stock photo libraries and taking high-res photos of like European buildings in real life and mapping them into the textures of the game. The thing is, that's an old-looking game, sort of geometry-wise. Like there's there's a couple of like kind of blocky-looking characters and stuff like that. And so textures aren't enough for a full-on remaster if Capcom were to sell this. But in the meantime, RE4 HD is a really cool project that's being worked on right now that'll hold us over until the eventual, hopeful, full-on remaster from Capcom.
Yeah, we'll see if 4 is next. It could be Code Veronica, and then right before we started filming, you floated the idea of Capcom remaking the original Resident Evil again.
Yeah.
Full 3D, right?
Yeah. I mean, Resident Evil Remake came out for the GameCube and then a couple other systems, obviously, and it's gorgeous, but it does still have the tank controls and the locked camera angles, which I love because it's super spooky. But yeah, I would totally love to go back to that mansion in like a full-on third-person 3D action-adventure game. Yeah. So they could go in either direction.
Yeah, I had never thought about that idea, but now I can't stop thinking about it. It's great. Dear viewers, what do you think? Do you want a Resident Evil 4 remake? Let us know in the comments. And for more on all things Residents and Evil, stay tuned at IGN.